In the 18th century, one empire ruled the oceans, controlled global trade, and commanded one of the most powerful armies on earth: Great Britain. Its flag flew across continents. Its navy dominated the seas. No one imagined that a group of small colonies, thousands of miles away, could ever challenge such a superpower. But across the Atlantic Ocean, in North America, 13 colonies were slowly moving toward rebellion. This is how the American Revolution began. By 1763, Britain had just won a massive global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. The victory gave Britain control over vast territories in North America, but victory came at a price. The war had nearly doubled Britain's national debt. London needed money, fast. British leaders believed the American colonies should help pay for the war. After all, it was fought partly to protect them. But the colonists did not see it that way. They believed they had already sacrificed enough, and now new taxes were coming. In 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act. For the first time, colonists had to pay a direct tax on printed materials, newspapers, legal documents, even playing cards. Soon after came the Sugar Act, then the Tea Act. To Britain, these were reasonable taxes. To the colonists, they were a violation of their rights. Why? Because they had no representatives in Parliament. Their powerful slogan spread quickly: no taxation without representation. Protests erupted across the colonies. Merchants boycotted British goods. Crowds gathered in the streets. Tension between Britain and the colonies was rising rapidly. Colonial leaders began organizing resistance. Groups like the Sons of Liberty formed to protest British policies. Pamphlets were printed. Speeches were delivered. British officials were threatened. The relationship between Britain and its colonies was deteriorating. And then, in 1770, violence broke out in Boston. British soldiers fired into a crowd of colonists. 5 men were killed. The event became known as the Boston Massacre. It shocked the colonies. Trust was fading. Anger was growing. In 1773, Britain passed the Tea Act to rescue a struggling British company. It allowed tea to be sold cheaply in the colonies, but still taxed. Many colonists saw this as a trick to make them accept Parliament's authority. On a cold December night in 1773, protesters disguised themselves and boarded British ships in Boston Harbor. They dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. This dramatic protest became known as the Boston Tea Party. It was bold, it was illegal, and it changed everything. Britain responded with harsh punishment. Parliament passed the coercive acts, laws designed to punish Massachusetts. Boston Harbor was closed. Self-government was restricted. British troops were sent to maintain order. Instead of calming the colonies, these laws united them. Other colonies began supporting Massachusetts. A Continental Congress was formed. For the first time, the colonies were acting together. War was no longer unthinkable, it was becoming inevitable. By 1774, the conflict had moved beyond taxes. It was about power, rights, and freedom. 13 colonies stood on the edge of revolution. And in 1775, the first shots would be fired. The American Revolution was about to begin. By 1774, tensions between the American colonies and Great Britain had reached a breaking point. Protests had turned into organized resistance. Boycotts had turned into defiance. But in April 1775, words would turn into gunfire. The American Revolution was about to explode into war. On April 19, 1775, British troops marched from Boston toward the towns of Lexington and Concord. Their mission was simple: seize colonial weapons and arrest rebel leaders. But the colonists were ready. Local militias, ordinary farmers, and blacksmiths gathered to resist. At Lexington, a single gunshot rang out. To this day, no one knows who fired first, but history remembers it as the shot heard round the world. Fighting quickly spread to Concord. British troops were forced to retreat under constant attack from colonial militias. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. After the battles, colonial leaders realized something important. If they were going to fight the most powerful empire in the world, they needed unity. In May 1775, representatives gathered in Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. They made a bold decision. They created the Continental Army, and they chose a commander, a tall Virginia planter with military experience, George Washington. Washington was not the most experienced general, but he had discipline, leadership, and determination. He understood that this war would not be easy. The early months of the war were brutal. The British army was highly trained and well equipped. The Continental Army was inexperienced and poorly supplied. Many soldiers lacked proper uniforms. Some had no shoes. Food was scarce. Yet morale remained surprisingly strong. Why? Because this war was no longer just about taxes. It was about liberty. In June 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill proved something important. Although the British technically won, they suffered heavy casualties. The colonists had shown they could stand against Britain's professional army. The revolution was real. Even as fighting continued, many colonists still hoped for peace. They did not initially seek independence. They wanted fair treatment within the British Empire. But Britain refused compromise. King and Parliament saw the rebellion as treason. Then, in early 1776, a powerful pamphlet changed everything. It was called Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. It argued boldly that independence was not only necessary, it was inevitable. The idea spread like wildfire. Public opinion shifted rapidly. The colonies were no longer asking for rights. They were demanding freedom. On July 4, 1776, history changed forever. The Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. The document was written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. It declared that all men are created equal. It stated that governments derive power from the consent of the governed. And if a government becomes destructive, the people have the right to change it. This was no longer rebellion. This was revolution. The 13 colonies officially became independent states. But declaring independence was the easy part. Winning it would be far more difficult. Britain still had the strongest navy in the world, the largest empire on earth, and the war was only beginning. In the coming years, the revolution would face its darkest days, and survival would not be guaranteed. By 1777, the American Revolution was in serious danger. The Continental Army had declared independence, but winning it was proving far more difficult. Great Britain still had the strongest military in the world, and now the revolution faced its darkest days. The British launched a new strategy. They aimed to divide the colonies by controlling the Hudson River and isolating New England, the heart of the rebellion. British forces captured New York City, then Philadelphia, the American capital. Morale dropped sharply. Many believed the revolution was collapsing. Soldiers deserted. Supplies ran low. Support weakened. It seemed only a matter of time before Britain crushed the rebellion. But history had other plans. In late 1777, British General John Burgoyne marched south from Canada. His goal was to split the colonies in two, but American forces surrounded him near Saratoga, New York. After intense fighting, Burgoyne surrendered. The American victory at Saratoga shocked the world. For the first time, the colonies had defeated a major British army in open battle. It proved something critical. The revolution was not hopeless. And someone important was watching. Across the Atlantic, France had been observing carefully. France had lost territory to Britain years earlier and wanted revenge. But they needed proof that the American cause could succeed. Saratoga provided that proof. In 1778, France officially allied with the Americans. The war was no longer a colonial rebellion. It became an international conflict. French ships, soldiers, weapons, and money began flowing to America. Britain now faced a global war on multiple fronts. The balance of power had shifted. But before French help could change the war, the Continental Army faced a brutal winter. In late 1777, Washington led his troops to a place called Valley Forge. It was a season of suffering. Freezing temperatures, little food, no proper clothing, disease spreading rapidly. Nearly 2,000 soldiers died that winter, yet the army did not collapse. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Discipline improved. Training intensified. Under the guidance of Baron von Steuben, a European military officer, the army became more professional. The soldiers who emerged from Valley Forge were no longer untrained militia. They were a real fighting force. Valley Forge became a symbol, not of defeat, but of resilience. The revolution survived not because it was easy, but because people refused to give up. Washington held the army together. Soldiers endured unimaginable hardship, and with French support now secured, hope returned. Britain was powerful, but the Americans were determined, and determination can change history. By 1778, the revolution had transformed. It was no longer a struggling rebellion. It was part of a global war. But Britain was far from defeated, and the conflict was about to shift south. into even more brutal battles. The final chapter was approaching. By 1779, the American Revolution was no longer just a colonial rebellion. It had become a global war. With France now fighting alongside the Americans, Great Britain was under pressure across the world. In Europe, the Caribbean, and beyond. But in America, the war was about to take a dangerous turn. After years of fighting in the North, Britain changed strategy. They believed the southern colonies had more loyalists, colonists still loyal to the British crown. If they could control the South, they believed the rebellion would collapse. In 1780, British forces captured Charleston, South Carolina, one of the worst American defeats of the war. Thousands of American soldiers were taken prisoner. The situation looked grim. But once again, the revolution refused to die. In the southern countryside, fighting became brutal and personal. Instead of large formal battles, small groups of American fighters used guerrilla tactics. They launched surprise attacks. They disrupted supply lines. They avoided direct confrontation. Leaders like Nathanael Greene weakened British forces through constant pressure. The British won battles, but they were losing control. The Southern campaign drained British resources and morale. And then, a critical mistake was made. British General Charles Cornwallis marched his army into Virginia. He eventually positioned his troops in a small coastal town called Yorktown. Cornwallis believed the British Navy would protect him, but he underestimated the coordination between American and French forces. George Washington saw an opportunity. With French support, he planned a bold and decisive move. In 1781, American and French forces surrounded Yorktown by land. At the same time, the French Navy blocked British ships from rescuing Cornwallis by sea. Yorktown became a trap. For weeks, heavy artillery bombarded British defenses. Supplies ran low. Hope faded. Cornwallis waited for reinforcements that never came. He was surrounded, outnumbered, cut off. The most powerful empire in the world had been cornered. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. Nearly 8,000 British soldiers laid down their weapons. It was the decisive victory the Americans had been waiting for. News of the surrender shocked London. The British public was exhausted by the long and expensive war. Political support for continuing the fight collapsed. Although minor fighting continued, Yorktown effectively ended the war. The revolution had succeeded, but winning the war was only part of the challenge. Now came an even greater test, building a new nation from scratch. In 1783, peace would finally come, and the world would witness the birth of something entirely new. In October 1781, British forces surrendered at Yorktown. The fighting had effectively ended, but victory on the battlefield was only the beginning. Now, 13 former colonies faced an even greater challenge. How do you build a nation from revolution? In 1783, representatives from the new American states met with British officials in Paris. The result was the Treaty of Paris. In this agreement, Great Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States. The boundaries of the new nation stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. It was a remarkable transformation. Just a decade earlier, these lands were British colonies. Now, they were part of a sovereign republic. The American Revolution had succeeded, but independence did not automatically create stability. The new nation faced serious problems. The economy was weak. The government under the Articles of Confederation was fragile and lacked strong central authority. States argued over trade, taxes, and territory. There was fear that the young nation might collapse before it truly began. Revolution had united the colonies against a common enemy. Peace forced them to define who they were. A stronger system was needed. In 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia once again, this time not to declare independence, but to design a government. The result was the United States Constitution. It created a system of checks and balances, 3 branches of government, a president, a Congress, a Supreme Court. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. The former revolutionary general now led the nation he helped create. The revolution had evolved from protest to war to governance. But the American Revolution was not only about territory or power. It was about ideas. The belief that government should serve the people, that rights are natural, not granted by kings, that citizens have the power to shape their destiny. These ideas crossed oceans. Only a few years later, they influenced the French Revolution. revolutionary movements in Latin America and beyond drew inspiration from America's struggle. The impact was global. The message was clear: empires were not invincible, yet the revolution was not perfect. While it spoke of equality, slavery still existed. Women did not yet have political rights. Native American nations were pushed aside. The promise of liberty would take generations to fully realize. The American Revolution opened the door, but the journey toward equality and justice was far from complete. History is rarely simple, and revolutions often leave unfinished work behind. From 13 divided colonies to a united republic, from subjects of a king to citizens of a nation, the American Revolution reshaped the modern world. It proved that ordinary people, driven by belief and determination, could challenge the greatest empire of their time, and in doing so, they changed history forever.